The spacious, elegantly furnished living room of the Bennett home was filled with soft, muted light, reflected in the smooth surfaces of the furniture and playing with golden reflections on the glass of wine left on the coffee table. Tall windows, covered with light cream curtains, allowed rare street lights to penetrate inside, adding a touch of secluded peace to the atmosphere. Jazz improvisation sounded quietly through the speaker's smooth, slightly thoughtful notes of the piano shimmered softly, creating a feeling of peace. There was nothing special about this evening, and that is why it seemed so perfect, filled with small details that make up the coziness. Rick Bennett sat at a massive wooden table, his elbows resting on the smooth surface, and the fingers of one hand automatically touched the edge of a cup in which his coffee had long cooled. His MacBook Pro 16 inches glowed softly in the twilight, filling the screen with complex drawings and calculations, a projection of an elite residential complex on which he had been working for several weeks. The graceful lines of buildings, slender silhouettes of facades, precise angles, and neat signatures were reflected in his attentive eyes, slightly squinted with intense concentration. From the kitchen came the measured knock of a knife on a cutting board, accompanied by a light, barely audible hum. The voice of his wife, Michelle, was soft, warm, almost indistinguishable, but for some reason this melodic sound filled the space, making it even more comfortable. The air was filled with delicious aromas of crispy baked salmon, fresh basil, and a creamy lemon sauce. They mixed with the delicate scent of a candle burning on the table, adding a light scent of vanilla and sandalwood. "Rick, can't you even hear what I'm saying?" rang out her voice, filled with slight reproach, but not devoid of warmth. Rick blinked, as if returning from a distant world of numbers, graphs, and lines, and smiled slightly embarrassed. "What? Sorry, I was thinking." Michelle appeared in the doorway, illuminated by the soft light of the kitchen. She casually leaned against the doorframe. Her figure seemed especially graceful in a lighthouse dress that emphasized the smooth lines of her silhouette. Her hair was pulled back casually into a high ponytail, with a few strands falling out, giving her a natural, effortless appeal. A slight grin flashed in her eyes, but something else was hidden behind it, a shadow of expectation, a subtle shade of a thought that she was in no hurry to voice. "I have tennis practice tomorrow," she said with a touch of playful confidence. Rick frowned as he ran through his wife's schedule in his mind. "Again? You were studying yesterday." Michelle shrugged her shoulders casually, raising her chin slightly. This gesture was characteristic of her when she wanted to show confidence. "We need to keep ourselves in shape." Rick nodded, but deep down he couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just about tennis. He knew that for her, this had long ceased to be just a hobby. Training had become something more. Maybe he was just screwing himself up, but he continued to push these thoughts away. He loved her and wanted to believe her. "Do you think I should sign up too?" he said with slight sarcasm, hoping to see at least a shadow of a smile on her face. Michelle did smile, but her gaze became a little less open. For a moment, Rick thought he saw something flash in her eyes that he couldn't quite make out. She turned around, heading back to the kitchen, and without looking back, said over her shoulder, "If you want, I can negotiate with Tyler." Rick nodded and was about to dive back into his work when suddenly the laptop beeps with a new message. The dull sound of an alert disrupted the smooth flow of the evening. A notification appeared on the screen. Just one line of text, but it made Rick's insides quiver. His gaze lingered on the monitor longer than usual. Outside the window, the sound of a moving car was heard, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked. There was silence in the room, laced with a subtle tension that Rick couldn't yet explain. Rick, without taking his eyes off the screen, felt his heart clench in his chest. He blinked, trying to comprehend the message, but the words did not disappear before his eyes. "Watch this. Your world will never be the same." Below the text was a link to YouTube. The title of the video seemed provocative and meaningful. "He trained me on and off the court." Rick swallowed, his hand instinctively reaching for the mouse. Click. The screen loaded and a hidden camera video appeared in front of his eyes. The image is blurry, the image is shaky, but still clear enough to understand what exactly is happening. The location was familiar, the locker room of the tennis club. He narrowed his eyes, his heart beating faster. A woman appeared in the frame. His woman, Michelle. She laughed, touching the shoulder of the man standing next to her. Tyler, the coach whose name he heard too often in their house. The video continued. At some point, Michelle sharply pulled Tyler towards her. Their lips met in a passionate kiss. Rick's fingers trembled in shock. The voice of his wife, which he knew so well, sounded in the silence of his office, but with such an intonation that he had never heard before. He has no idea. God, I love it when we take risks. Tyler laughed, his hand sliding down Michelle's back. You've already learned a lot, but this is just the beginning. Rick felt everything inside him turn over. He blinked several times, hoping that it was just a dream, an evil prank, some kind of mistake. But no. He rewinded the video, looking at the details again and again. No part of the recording left any doubt. This was reality. There was a pounding in my temples, like hammer blows. His chest felt as if he had just taken a powerful blow to the solar plexus. The world he had so carefully built shattered into fragments, leaving behind emptiness and cold. The palms became sticky, but not from fear, from anger, which flared up more and more with every second. The gaze darted around the screen, trying to grab hold of at least something that would refute reality. But the truth pierced him like a knife, without a chance of salvation. Rick took a deep breath and pushed himself away from the table. He stood up and walked around the room, feeling his body trembling. He couldn't stay still. Everything inside him was seething. Emotions changed one after another. Rage, pain, disgust. It seemed that his entire marriage, his entire life that he treasured so much, collapsed in 1 second. His gaze fell on the glass of whiskey left on the nightstand. He grabbed it and downed the contents in one gulp, but the alcohol did not help. The burning taste only intensified the pain inside. My head was throbbing, my thoughts were confused. He sat down in front of the screen again. He opened his phone and scrolled through messages from Michelle. Banal, ordinary words that now seemed like lies. He remembered how just recently she was coming out of the shower, her hair was wet, her smile was light and confident. He then kissed her temple, and she just laughed, gently touching his hand. How many times has she already lied to him? How long did this betrayal last? Anger surged in a new wave. He clenched his fists. Something had to be done. He couldn't just sit and digest it. But what? He was not an impulsive person. He was not used to giving in to emotions, but now reason could not take over. The phone vibrated in his hand. New message from Michelle. Darling, I'm sorry it's so late. I was late after training. How was your evening? Rick looked at the screen and clenched his teeth. His fingers trembled involuntarily. He took a deep breath and then exhaled slowly. He slowly poured himself a second shot of whiskey, looking at the photograph of his wife that hung on the wall. Her eyes looked straight at him, as if in mockery. How long has she been lying? Memories came flooding back, one after another. 25 years ago. They were young, in love, inseparable. Their first trip to the islands was a paradise where the sun melted in the azure water and the warm wind smelled of salt and spices. They lived in a bungalow on the beach, waking up to the cries of seagulls and the rustling of waves. Rick remembered how Michelle laughed, her ringing, iridescent laugh mingling with the sound of the surf as she carefreely ran barefoot along the hot sand. Her light dress fluttered in the wind, the hem clung to her bare legs, and her skin, covered with a golden tan, glowed in the rays of the setting sun. She turned to him over her shoulder, her eyes sparkling with joy, and at that moment it seemed that the whole world was focused only on her smile, on her movements, on every light breath. He remembered how her hair smelled of coconut and sun, how its soft strands tickled his face when she leaned towards him to steal a kiss. Then, among serene days filled with sun, sea, and love, they thought that happiness was an eternity stretching between moments woven from kisses and quiet confessions. At night, her body pressed against his, hot, smooth, pliable. Their breathing merged into a single rhythm, and their hearts beat in time with each other. Her fingers slid over his skin slowly, barely touching, awakening every cell of his body, making him desire her more than air, than light, than life itself. The tropical breeze brought with it the tart smell of salt, jasmine, and something subtly sweet, mixing with the heat of their heated bodies. When she whispered his name, her voice sounded like a spell, penetrating into his very heart, leaving an imprint there that, as he thought then, would never disappear. On those nights, while the moonlight slid over her bare shoulders, and he felt her lips glide over his skin, Rick believed that it would always be this way. He could not imagine that someday these lips would belong to another, that the hands that squeezed him with such passion would seek warmth in someone else's arms, that her whisper, once dedicated only to him, will begin to sound in someone else's ear. But the most painful thing is that she made it so easy. 24 years ago, Rick remembered the day he saw his son for the first time. Daniel was born late at night, when a thunderstorm was raging outside the window, and the room was in semi-darkness, broken only by the soft light of the lamps. When the doctor handed him a tiny boy wrapped in a warm blanket, Rick's heart sank with excitement. Daniel was so small, but the strength was already felt in him, his tiny fists clenched tightly, and his lungs, which had just experienced their first breath, announced themselves with a loud cry. From then on, Rick followed his every move. He remembered how Daniel had first reached out to him, how hesitantly he had taken his first steps, stumbling, but stubbornly getting up again. He taught him to ride a bicycle, holding him by the seat, while the boy, lips pursed from tension, struggled to maintain his balance. I remembered how proud I was when he confidently rushed forward, laughing with delight. Over the years, Daniel's character became stronger and stronger. He was an independent, determined boy who always wanted to do things his own way. He argued, defended his point of view, but at the same time, the same light that Rick saw in his reflection always burned in his eyes. They discussed the future, dreams, goals, and each time Rick felt proud of his son. 22 years ago, 2 years after Daniel was born, a new miracle appeared in their lives. Chloe, a small, fragile angel who captured Rick's heart from the very first moment. He remembered the first time he held her in his arms. She was tiny, warm, and smelled of something subtly sweet and familiar. Her tiny fingers, so soft and weightless, squeezed around his thumb, and at that moment he realized that this girl would become his weakness. Michelle looked at them with a smile, but Chloe was always closer to him than to her mother. Since childhood, she looked for his gaze, reached out to him, fell asleep, buried in his shoulder. He remembered how he read her fairy tales before bed, how she loved it when he carried her in his arms, swinging her in the air, causing ringing children's laughter. How she grabbed his face with her small hands and pressed herself to his cheek, whispering, "Dad." These moments were priceless. Rick closed his eyes and imagined Michelle as she was in their first years together. She gave up her gallery for the sake of her family. At the time, it seemed like a noble choice. He remembered how he admired her energy, her passion for art, how she could talk for hours about the artists who inspired her. Later, other hobbies appeared in her life: charity, endless meetings with friends. She learned to be an ideal housewife, an ideal wife, an ideal mother. Rick recalled how often he caught this strange, subtle shade in her eyes, either fatigue or boredom. He didn't attach any importance to it then. She was beautiful, fit, impeccably groomed from her manicure to her carefully selected dress. She knew how to charm people, be the center of attention, smile so much that men forgot about their wives. And him, he always thought he knew her better than anyone. Now he understood he was wrong. A year ago, a warm evening filled with laughter, wine, and lightness. They sat at a large table on the terrace of their friend's house, where the soft light of the lanterns enveloped everyone in a cozy golden glow. The aroma of roasted meat, spices, and expensive red wine hung in the air. The conversation flowed smoothly, like a quiet, leisurely river in which voices, jokes, and memories intertwined. Rick remembered how he felt then, relaxed, content. His hand involuntarily found Michelle's hand under the table, his fingers lightly squeezing her palm. She smiled at him, her eyes sparkled in the twilight, and he believed that this smile belonged only to him. But now he knew how deeply he had been mistaken. You seem to spend more time with your racket than with your husband. What is this, your new love?" Catherine said this with her signature grin, lightly, as if by chance, lazily swinging the glass in her hand. A sparkle flashed in her gaze, impudent, probing, too attentive. But then Rick didn't attach any importance to it. Everyone laughed, toasts were raised, and friendly remarks were heard in the air again. Michelle raised an eyebrow slightly, looked at Catherine with a slight smirk, then took a sip of her wine. Her movements were graceful, precise, as if she was playing her role on stage in front of an attentive audience. "I can't live without him now," she answered, leaning forward, her voice sounding a little lower than usual, softly, with a hint of playful challenge. Rick remembered how at that moment he just smiled. Then he thought that she was simply interested in tennis, a new hobby that absorbed her completely. He was never jealous of her sports. On the contrary, he liked to see her enthusiastic and happy. But now every word she uttered then sounded different. She wasn't just talking about tennis. She played with him. She teased him, tested the limits of his trust, tested how blind he was. How long has she been playing this deceitful game? How many times did her lips, uttering words of love, hide mockery? How many times did her eyes, which seemed sincere, reflect a completely different man? Rick felt his fingers curl into a fist. If he had then seen in her smile even a shadow of the betrayal that was now tearing him apart. If only he had known that this innocent dinner was just part of her performance. But he didn't know, and she continued to play. 2 months ago, he invited her to go to the cinema, but she was late for training. When he asked why, she looked away, hesitantly straightening her hair. He noticed it then, but did not attach any importance. Trusted. Now the truth was crystallizing, hitting him like a cold, merciless wave. He didn't notice the obvious, didn't want to see it. Rick ran his hand over his face. Anger gave way to icy determination. He wasn't someone who would just settle. He won't let his world crumble without an answer. He couldn't just watch anymore. This was not the kind of person who forgives. He is a predator, not a prey. He needed a person who knew how marriages and destinies collapse. A person who will not only sympathize, but also help turn destruction into art. Without a doubt, this man was Andrew Holmes. Friend, advocate, the one who has seen more dirty scams than anyone in this city. They once studied together at Princeton. Andrew was the guy who always knew how to get out of any situation, smart, cynical, and ruthless in business. He quickly made a name for himself in the legal world, specializing in divorce proceedings. Despite his age, he did not plan to start a family. He was satisfied with an open relationship. "It's better to have a dog, it definitely won't betray you," he liked to repeat with a grin. This outlook on life was formed in him for a reason. In his youth, Andrew had to become an unwitting witness to how his parents destroyed each other, dragging him into their messy divorce proceedings. He remembered loud arguments behind closed doors, tense silences that preceded new outbursts of anger, and the icy glances they exchanged when they were forced to be close. He saw how once warm, sincere love turned into hatred, how people who swore to be each other's support became enemies. Like shared memories, happy moments that seemed indestructible were erased in the dry lines of legal documents, where feelings replaced clauses in agreements and requirements for the division of property. This experience left a deep imprint on his soul. He learned one important lesson: never allow himself to find himself in such a situation. Marriage, commitments, promises made in a fit of passion, he perceived all this not as an expression of love, but as a voluntary imprisonment in a cage, which over time fetters and kills feelings. But despite his worldview, he never tried to force it on Rick. Andrew understood that every person has their own path, and if marriage was important to his friend, he respected that choice. He saw how Rick loved his family, how he valued his wife and children, and did not try to destroy his illusion of happiness, even if he himself did not believe in it. Andrew always treated Rick's family well, with genuine respect, but never offered advice unless asked. Rick picked up his phone, replaying their last meeting. It was a business dinner, one of those evenings when business conversations flowed smoothly into informal conversation. They sat in the twilight of a cozy restaurant, where the dim light of the lamps was reflected in the mirrors, creating an intimate atmosphere. The air was filled with the aroma of fried meat, expensive alcohol, and a slight hint of cigar smoke coming from the neighboring tables. Plates of perfectly cooked steak stood in front of them, and the amber glow of aged bourbon played in massive glasses. Rick, pouring glasses, grinned, casting an attentive glance at his friend. "So, Andrew, how is your next Miss Don't Call Me in the Morning doing?" Andrew raised an eyebrow, grinning, then leaned slightly closer, resting his elbow on the table and lowering his voice, as if he was revealing a great secret. "Oh man, best of all. Her name is Brooke. She works as an attorney, and let's just say she knows more positions than all my procedural codes combined." He paused, letting the words hang in the air, then leaned even closer and added with a conspiratorial glint in his eyes. "If judges were as flexible in interpreting laws, I would have lived in the White House a long time ago." Rick laughed, shaking his head, and then, taking a sip of the bourbon, leaned forward slightly, watching his friend with a slight hint of irony. "You understand that one day one of them will catch you on the net?" Andrew snorted, taking a sip from his glass, and grinned. "To do this, I will have to first stop being a shark. And I, my friend, was born to swim on the high seas." Rick just grinned. They both knew that Andrew would never change his lifestyle, a cynical bachelor for whom commitment was nothing more than an illusion. After 5 minutes of reminiscing, he dialed the number. "Rick," Andrew's voice was hoarse and sleepy, "do you even know what time it is?" "I need to meet you tomorrow. It's urgent." "Michelle," the lawyer instantly realized. Rick was silent. There was a short pause on the phone. "Crap. Okay, come to the office at 9 in the morning." Rick turned off the phone, finished his whiskey, and put the glass on the table. He is no longer a victim. He is a hunter. Andrew Holmes knew that if Rick called in the middle of the night, then the matter was really serious. They had been friends for many years, and he managed to study his character to the smallest detail. Rick was never a person who gave in to emotions, did not make a scene, did not lose his composure. He acted. He analyzed, weighed all the pros and cons, made decisions coldly, accurately, without unnecessary words. And if he calls his number at 1 in the morning, it means that this moment has come. Andrew remembered their first meeting. Princeton campus, a cool autumn evening, a slight smell of wet leaves, and 2 bottles of cheap whiskey, which they shared, sitting on the stone stairs of one of the buildings. They were young and self-confident then, and the night passed in fierce debate about which of them would achieve more. Rick always strived for excellence. In work, in family, in life, he built his destiny, like an impeccable architectural project, where every element was carefully verified and installed in its place. He left no room for mistakes and did not allow himself to lose. For him, defeat was something unacceptable, impossible. The kitchen of the Bennett house was filled with soft morning light, but for Rick it was the darkest morning of his life. He didn't sleep all night. The hours dragged on painfully long, and my thoughts gave me no rest. There was a cup of coffee in front of him, but he didn't even try to touch it. The liquid had long since cooled down, like all his illusions. His eyes burned from lack of sleep, but the pain inside was stronger than physical fatigue. Steps up the stairs. Light scent of citrus shower gel. Voice. "Ugh, I was so tired yesterday." Michelle stretched, approaching the coffee machine. The smile on her face looked carefree. "I have another training session today, but I'm thinking maybe I should skip it." She laughed as if nothing had happened. Rick slowly looked up from his cup. He wanted to say something, but couldn't. The words stuck in my throat. "Do you think so?" he responded dryly. Michelle shrugged, took out a capsule for the coffee machine, inserted it, and pressed the button. "Yes, although no, Tyler said that we will practice serving today." She winked. "He says I have excellent technique." The cup in Rick's hand shook slightly. He clenched his fingers on the ceramic handle. Everything was seething inside him. He heard her voice again from the video, full of passion and anticipation. "Technique? Yes, I saw your technique, Mitchell, and how he trains you not only on the court." He thought but didn't say anything out loud. He stood up abruptly. The chair creaked slightly on the floor, but Michelle didn't even turn around. She was completely immersed in making her coffee. Chloe entered the room, lightly, almost silently. She wore black athletic leggings that showed off her shapely legs and a loose sweatshirt with slightly stretched cuffs that kept her cozy. Her hair, tied in a high ponytail, revealed her thin face with high cheekbones and clear eyes focused intently on the phone screen. As she walked, with the usual movement of her finger, she unlocked the device and immediately delved into the digital world, as if into a parallel reality that existed only for her. Chloe sat down opposite her father at a massive oak table, on the surface of which barely noticeable scratches were visible traces of many years of family breakfasts, conversations, and arguments. She didn't even look up, didn't notice the heavy silence hanging in the air like an invisible fog. "Good morning," she muttered absently, mechanically scrolling through her social media feed. Rick looked at her, and everything inside was shrinking. Images from the past rose before his eyes. Here she was, just a baby, running around the house in pajamas with unicorns, laughing loudly, jumping over the carpet, and then suddenly jumping onto his lap, snuggling, talking about her childhood dreams with the same passion with which she might now be discussing the latest news in a chat. But now it was not the same girl sitting in front of him. An adult, confident young woman, a student studying marketing, is constantly aware of all events, trends, and news. Chloe lived in a world of likes, algorithms, and analytics, but in her eyes there were still glimpses of that little girl who once sought protection from her parents. She always looked at them with admiration, considered her and Michelle an ideal couple, an example of a strong, reliable family. If only she knew the truth. Chloe looked at her father. "Everything is fine?" "You don't look good," she asked, a little worried. Rick took a sip of his cold coffee. The bitterness hit his tongue, but he couldn't taste it. His gaze slowly slid from his daughter back to Michelle, who was now standing at the stove, making herself some toast. She was completely calm. It was as if nothing had happened. "I'm just tired, work has piled up," he finally answered, trying to make his voice soft. He didn't want Chloe to feel the slightest bit of tension. A new project, a lot of details. Chloe nodded, accepting the answer without further questions, and turned back to her phone. Rick watched her with a bitter realization of how quickly she had grown. Those moments are still fresh in his memory when she ran around the house, clinging to his hand, demanding to tell him a story before bed. And now an adult, independent woman sat in front of him, and he didn't know how long he could hide the truth from her and his brother. Michelle turned, took a sip of her coffee, and looked at Rick. She clearly felt something, but perhaps chalked it up to fatigue. "Are you going to work today?" she asked, casually. Rick kept his gaze on her. Thousands of questions were spinning in his head. He might say something now, to bring down on her all the anger that was burning him from the inside. But no, not yet. "Yes, I'll go. But before that, I'll stop by Andrew," he answered, trying to keep his voice even. "We need to discuss one issue and then go to the office." Michelle nodded and turned away, and Chloe turned her attention back to her phone. Rick walked up the stairs to his office. He felt tired, but there was an important day ahead. It was necessary to get together, rethink the situation, and build a strategy. Meeting Andrew should have been the first step, but there was not an iota of peace in his soul. It seemed as if a storm was raging inside him. He opened the door, walked to the table, and turned on the laptop. His hands automatically slid over the keyboard, but his thoughts were not occupied with work. He couldn't get the images he saw last night out of his head. How could he be so blind? He took a deep breath and ran his hand over his face, trying to come to his senses a little. The quiet sound of footsteps behind him made Rick flinch, as if someone's ghost was creeping behind him. His heart sank, and he turned sharply. Chloe stood in the doorway. She clutched the phone in her hands as if it were an anchor that could keep her in reality. The daughter's face seemed pale, and tears shone in her eyes, reflecting anxiety, fear, and something else, determination. "Dad." Her voice trembled like a thin thread about to break. "I sent you the video." Rick froze. Something painfully tightened in my chest, as if from a blow to the gut. He could not move, could not even immediately comprehend the meaning of her words. He just looked at his daughter, noticing how her fingers nervously fiddled with the edge of the long sleeve of her sweatshirt, as if trying to hide the trembling that betrayed her excitement. I just, I just wanted you to know, she continued, swallowing the lump in her throat, her voice breaking. It appeared on my YouTube feed. I couldn't believe it, but I couldn't help but tell you either. Her eyes darted back to the phone screen, as if there was an answer to all her torment. She took a deep breath, as if gathering strength. I sent it to you anonymously, she admitted, looking him straight in the face. But now I understand. You should know that I am aware. She took an uncertain step forward, pain splashed in her eyes, but also firmness, which Rick did not expect to see in her so soon. Dad, I'm close, and I want to support you. What does Mom do? Her voice trembled, but she continued, pursing her lips. You don't deserve it. Nobody deserves this. The last words sounded especially clearly, with some kind of inner strength that pierced Rick to the very heart. He saw in front of him not just a daughter, but an adult who was worried about him, trying to become a support for him, and this made it even more painful. She looked down and tears began to roll down her cheeks. Rick slowly walked up to her and, without saying a word, pulled her into a tight hug. He felt her body shake with suppressed sobs. He wanted to say something, but he understood that any words now would be meaningless. It's okay, he said quietly. I'm glad you told me, but until I figure everything out, we'll both have to pretend that nothing happened. Chloe nodded silently, knowing that her father wouldn't just leave it like that. Her fingers tightened around the fabric of his shirt, and they embraced once more. For a moment, Rick felt her return to being the little girl who sought his protection. It wasn't supposed to be like this, Chloe sobbed. I always thought we had an ideal family. Rick closed his eyes. He knew that this blow was no less painful for her than for him. I thought so too, Chloe. But I promise we will get through this. She pulled back a little, wiped her tears, and nodded. Rick sighed, letting go of his daughter, and looked at his watch again. There was little time left. He had to go to Andrew. He took one last look at Chloe. I need to go, he said, taking the keys from the table. But we'll talk more. Fine? Okay, Chloe answered quietly, wiping away her tears. Rick looked at her again, remembering this moment. Then he turned around, collected his documents, and headed for the exit. Chloe remained in the office, motionless, as if the space around her had suddenly lost its contours. She slowly sank into her father's massive leather chair, which was a little too big for her, but surprisingly comfortable, with soft armrests that smelled of wood and old books. Her fingers trembled as she ran her hand along the dark wood of the desk, as if trying to find at least some support in its cold surface. Thoughts rushed between past and present, memories of childhood confused with the stunning reality of this day. The phone in her hands suddenly vibrated, breaking her out of her thoughts. She blinked and looked at the screen. Notice from Aunt Catherine. How is my baby? I have a window in my schedule. I'll be with you soon. Please prepare a guest room for me. Chloe sighed heavily and closed her eyes for a second. Catherine, her aunt, her mother's younger sister, was not just a relative, she always remained close, the one who knew and understood them better than many. When Mom and Dad were busy with work, Catherine was the one who spent the most time with her and Daniel. Evenings with hot chocolate and long conversations, trips to the park, her sincere, infectious laughter, it all seemed so warm and familiar. Divorced, without children, but infinitely loving with her brother, Catherine became something between a caring nanny and a slightly reckless older friend. But at the same time, she always had a sharp, sarcastic nature. She never hid her attitude towards their father. Her caustic remarks could be offensive, but somehow they did not cross the line. Her words were apt, witty, sometimes caustic, but spoken with such skill that even Rick himself more often simply shrugged it off than was seriously offended. Unlike her mother, she always told the truth to her face, no matter what it was. As a child, her aunt often saved her from trouble. She taught her how to change grades in an electronic diary, covered up her little pranks, and always made it clear that she was on her side. Chloe remembered how, at the age of 10, Catherine arranged a spy day for her, providing her with a listening device that was actually an old broken voice recorder and taught her how to fake her mother's handwriting for notes to school. Or how, at the age of 15, she helped make a fake permit for an overnight stay with a friend, when in fact Chloe was going to a concert. Now Catherine will appear in the house at the most difficult moment, and Chloe didn't know if that was good or bad. Water gurgled softly in the kitchen, flowing in thin streams into the sink, filling the silence with a measured, almost soothing sound. The air was filled with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, a subtle hint of vanilla from her morning lotion, and the light, clean smell of glass glasses that she had just washed. Michelle carefully placed the dishes in their places, moving slowly, with the refined smoothness of habitual movements. She enjoyed this moment of morning peace. But thoughts, like disobedient shadows, did not want to obey. They were slipping away from her intended plans, going back to places she shouldn't have gone, where the heart began to beat faster. There, where a long extinguished fire flared up inside again. To him, Tyler. The name alone caused a whirlwind of emotions in her. She shouldn't have thought about him. Not now. Not here, in the comfort of your kitchen, in a house where everything exuded family stability. But her thoughts still returned to the look that burned through her, to the voice that sounded so low and soft, to the feeling that she had almost forgotten, but which was now pulsating in her chest again, reminding her of itself. Young, energetic, with a slight grin that could drive you crazy. He moved with the confidence of a man who knew what women liked. Yesterday's training flashed before my eyes in all its details. His hand on her waist, his voice slightly muffled, but so confident. "Do you need some extra training, Mrs. Bennett?" Her back then became covered in goosebumps. He lingered in the locker room longer than usual, his gaze intent, penetrating under the skin, and she answered him with a smile. It was stupid, risky, but so damn exciting. She missed this feeling. Rick. Loyal, dedicated, reliable. The support of their family, the person she could always rely on, who never gave a reason to doubt his love and devotion. Their marriage was strong, based on mutual respect, trust, years of shared joys and trials. He took care of her, the children, and the house. He was a good husband. But when was the last time his gaze lingered on her, not just with the usual warmth, but with that same hungry, burning interest that once made his heart skip a beat? When was the last time his fingers slid over her skin, not mechanically, but with greed, with a burning desire to touch, feel, take possession? Michelle ran her hand over her wrist, as if remembering how he used to squeeze her hand, pull her towards him, lightly touch the thin skin at the base of her palm with his lips, causing goosebumps on her body. When did it go away? Gradually, imperceptibly, like a summer evening leaving, replaced by a cold, inevitable night. A year ago, he plunged headlong into another project. Her days began to resemble each other. Breakfasts, fitness, meetings with friends, charity events. But a feeling of emptiness grew inside her. The children grew up, each had their own life. She was left alone, locked in a golden cage of comfort that no longer brought joy. But Tyler, he allowed her to remember that she was alive, that her body was still capable of trembling with anticipation. Michelle ran her hand down her neck, feeling the warm wave of adrenaline rising inside her again. I needed to get myself together. Shower, light makeup, then to the salon to slightly adjust the haircut and refresh the color. Maybe buy something special from a lingerie boutique. Why not? She deserved some fun. She took her training bag and looked at her reflection in the mirror. For a second, it seemed to her that something new, dangerous flashed in her eyes. She smiled and headed to the shower. She had a busy day ahead of her. And Tyler. Rick drove the car through the morning Los Angeles, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter than usual. The traffic was heavy, but he didn't even notice it. His thoughts were elsewhere. He had already telephoned several people, those who knew how to work quickly, clearly, and without unnecessary questions. With voices merging into a single whole, They listened to his requests, asked short clarifying questions, and named the amounts. Prices for information, for surveillance, for access to classified data. Everyone knew that if Rick Bennett asked for something, he was willing to pay. He doesn't bargain. He gets what he wants. The first call is to a private detective, a specialist who could quietly penetrate financial reports, track calls and messages. The second is to an old acquaintance in the banking sector. It was necessary to find out what other accounts Michelle had, where the money was going, and who else was involved in her spending. The third is to a cyber specialist who could gain access to her hidden correspondence. He collected the net, tightened it slowly but surely. Conversations went smoothly, deals were concluded at lightning speed, and before he realized that time had flown by, his car had already stopped at the tall glass skyscraper, the headquarters of his company. Rick turned off the engine and paused for a second, looking at the reflection of the building in the windshield. He remembered how it all began. 20 years ago, he had nothing, only knowledge, ambition, and endless nights working on drawings in a tiny rented apartment. Gradually, the projects became larger, the office expanded, and the employees multiplied. Now he had a powerful architectural firm working with elite clients, innovative projects, contracts worth tens of millions. He created it all himself. No one had the right to break it. The working day passed quickly, leaving behind a feeling of a burned-out charge of energy, fatigue mixed with satisfaction, and a slight tension in the temples. Several meetings with top managers where everyone tried to prove their indispensability. Discussion of the smallest details of the project, which contained the very essence of the future masterpiece. Negotiations with developers, tough, exhausting, but inevitable. Everyone wanted to bite off a bigger piece, but Rick did not allow anyone to dictate his terms. He knew what he wanted and knew how to get it. This project was more than just another construction project. The complex of elite skyscrapers on the coast of Santa Monica was to become his main creation, the crown of many years of experience, the quintessence of his talent, a symbol that would leave a mark on this world. He saw them in his imagination down to the smallest detail, majestic towers of glass and steel reflecting the sun's rays as if they themselves were glowing from within. Airy terraces with panoramic views of the endless ocean, where the morning breeze will touch the faces of happy residents, and sunsets will paint the horizon in shades of gold and crimson. But it wasn't just about beauty. These buildings were supposed to be the embodiment of the future. Advanced technologies, intelligent control systems, maximum energy efficiency. In a world where nature and urbanism constantly collide, he wanted to create something that would harmoniously fit into the landscape, not destroying it, but complementing it. And of course, safety skyscrapers had to withstand the elements, withstand earthquakes, and give people a feeling of security. Every decision he made reflected his philosophy. He built more than just buildings, he created the future, designed a space that would outlive himself. And perhaps this was his way of leaving a mark on eternity. But thoughts still returned to something else. To what he saw last night. To what now seemed to poison his every step. He listened to the engineer's reports, nodded, made adjustments, but still saw frames from the video before his eyes. By 6 in the evening, he stretched tiredly in his chair, glanced over the latest letters in the mail, and glanced at the phone screen. New message. Michelle, I'm going home. Will you be there soon? Rick stared at the screen for a long time. It seemed like it was an ordinary wife's question, caring every day. But now he saw it differently. Everything that seemed ordinary has now become saturated with lies. He scrolled through the phone in his hands, then opened the latest message from Andrew. Andrew, everything is going according to plan. Soon we will have data on her calls and meetings. Rick took a deep breath. It was a game of time. He couldn't let his emotions take over. He typed a short answer to his wife. After a while, he entered a quiet suburb where wide, streetlight-lit streets ran between manicured lawns and immaculately trimmed hedges. There was a calm, almost frozen atmosphere here, as if time moved more slowly than in the noisy, pulsating city center from which he had just returned. The car slowed down gently and stopped silently at the gates of the mansion. He looked at his watch 15 minutes earlier than planned. Not that it matters. Nobody was looking forward to it. No one rushed to meet him on the threshold, illuminated by the warm lights of street lamps. The house towered before him in the darkening sky, still the same majestic, well-groomed, with neat lines of the facade and windows flickering from the inside. But now he seemed alien to him, as if it was just a pretty picture, an illusion created for someone's eyes, and not a real home to which you want to return. Rick ran his hand over his face and took a deep breath, but the feeling of heaviness in his chest did not disappear. He looked at the familiar door, at the soft light in the windows, at the neatly trimmed bushes at the entrance, and felt like a guest. Uninvited, random, not belonging to this place. Rick got out of the car, slowly breathed in the cool evening air, and walked to the front door. He paused for a second before pressing the handle, as if gathering his strength. Laughter came from the kitchen, resonant, light, as if there were no secrets, betrayal, or lies in the house. When he entered the living room, a picture unfolded before him, which, if he had been in a different mood, might even have seemed pleasant. Soft light filled the room, reflecting off the glass surfaces, giving a cozy warmth to the evening. Chloe sat on a high bar stool, leaning over her phone, her fingers deftly sliding across the screen, and her lips slightly trembling in a subtle smile. Perhaps she was reading something funny or just trying to distract herself. Catherine stood nearby with effortless grace. In one hand, she held a glass of white wine, which trembled slightly in the light of the lamps, and with the other, she casually straightened a strand of perfectly styled hair. Her eyes sparkled with mischief, and a familiar sly smile played at the corners of her lips. She was laughing at something, clearly enjoying the moment, casting short, amused glances at her niece. As soon as Catherine noticed him, her face instantly lit up with feigned surprise, and her voice sounded playful, with that same slight note of sarcasm that Rick had known for many years. "About," she exclaimed, raising her eyebrows slightly. "And here is our workaholic in person." She took a casual sip of wine, narrowing her eyes as if assessing his appearance. "You look like you haven't slept for several nights," she continued, lazily running her finger along the rim of her glass. "Wait, or is this a new fashion for bags under the eyes? How old do you say you are?" Her lips curled into a mocking smile, and her voice carried that familiar mixture of teasing irony and hidden curiosity. Rick wearily ran his hand over his face, feeling the fatigue settling on his shoulders like a heavy weight. He chuckled weakly, trying to at least for a moment play along with this light, almost homely performance that Catherine put on at every opportunity. "I look no worse than a woman who spends her evenings in the company of a dozen black cats and is convinced that they are the only creatures worthy of her company," he muttered, tilting his head to the side and looking at her with feigned thoughtfulness. Chloe, without looking up from her phone, burst into laughter. Her shoulders twitched slightly, and the corners of her lips twitched in a treacherous smile. Catherine, of course, did not miss the chance to play for the audience. She raised her eyebrows and pretended to be deeply offended, dramatically pressing her palm to her heart, as if his words had inflicted a mortal wound on her. "First of all, not with 10, but with 2, she retorted, rolling her eyes as if she could barely tolerate this conversation. The glass of wine in her hand tilted slightly, but she quickly straightened it out gracefully, taking a sip as if her reputation depended on the flawless completion of this scene. "And secondly, I don't quarrel with my neighbors, I educate them." She pursed her lips, thinking for a moment, then lazily leaned against the counter, looking at Rick with a cheeky half-smile. "If someone parks in my spot," she continued, drawing out meaningfully, "I consider it my sacred duty to paint their windshield with cute reminders of etiquette." Her voice sounded innocent, but her eyes sparkled with slyness. "And what kind?" Rick said lazily, folding his arms over his chest. "Well, for example, you are a wonderful person, but you park like an ass." Or my personal favorite, she took another sip of wine and smiled dreamily. "Next time, leave the car in your living room, since you like taking up other people's space so much." Chloe could no longer hold back her laughter, ringing, sincere, the one that cannot be faked. Her shoulders shook with merriment, and her fingers frantically squeezed the phone, with which she covered her face, trying to somehow control herself. She knew that her laughter was giving her away, but it was impossible to stop. Rick shook his head, closing his eyes for a second as if giving himself a moment to catch his breath. A familiar, slightly contradictory feeling stirred in my chest, slight fatigue from her endless barbs, but at the same time hidden gratitude for the ease with which Catherine always filled any space. This ease, bold and lively, was her signature style, her hallmark, what made her special. Yes, this woman has not changed at all. Still as sharp, with an impeccably sharp tongue, as if honed by years of sarcastic remarks. Her irony was almost an art, a fine line between mockery and truth, which she balanced with frightening ease. She was not afraid to speak directly, to challenge, to tease with words in such a way that even the most confident interlocutors began to feel uncomfortable. The complete opposite of her sister. Where Michelle was soft, self-possessed, sensitive, Catherine was a whirlwind, straightforward, fearless, as if testing this world to the limit. And no matter how tired Rick was of her barbs, he could not help but admit, there was something in this chaotic charm of hers that made her unforgettable. Outwardly, they really were similar. The same high cheekbones, clearly defined lines of the face, the same expressive eyes in which a mocking sparkle was hidden, the same well-groomed manner characteristic of both. But if Michelle was the embodiment of sophistication and elegance, she always followed every detail of her image, chose expensive dresses that fit her figure perfectly, delicate jewelry and heels that emphasized her grace. Then Catherine lived by completely different rules. She preferred lightly distressed jeans, leather jackets, comfortable sneakers, and minimal makeup. Her hair, although well-groomed, rarely had varnishes or complex styling. Most often, it was simply casually combed back or tied into a ponytail. Instead of the aromas of expensive perfume that Michelle always surrounded herself with, Catherine smelled of freshness, a light trail of coffee and wind, as if she had just come from a long walk. Her style, her demeanor, even her laugh, all this was different, contrasting, alive. If Michelle seemed like a flawlessly polished diamond, then Catherine was free and untamed, like a wild stone that did not need a setting to look vibrant. Catherine had everything to lead a luxurious life. Her income allowed for expensive restaurants, designer clothes, and the latest model cars. But she never sought status, did not need to confirm her importance with branded items or big names. She had little interest in luxury and glamour, unlike her sister, who always knew a lot about style and exquisite details. Catherine spent her money not on diamonds, but on high-tech gadgets, advanced data protection systems, and rare technical innovations that would excite only a true information security fanatic. But she had one more weakness: her two black cats, Phantom and Knox. They lived like real kings of her apartment. They were given separate beds, the best food, and their toy arsenal could be the envy of even a specialized store. Catherine doted on them, claiming that these creatures understood her sarcasm best of all and would never betray her, unlike people. Rick suddenly remembered her first and only marriage. It seemed like it was so long ago that it was now perceived as an almost unreal story. Catherine got married before Michelle, and then the whole family was sure she had found her ideal man. Remembering that time, he saw before him a completely different Catherine, albeit with the same character, but with a softer look, with a dreamy smile that rarely appeared on her face in recent years. But a year later, everything fell apart. The divorce was quiet, almost without scandals, but her eyes have since become sharper, and her sarcasm has become even more accurate. This happened around the same time that he himself met Michelle. Their fates were somehow strangely intertwined in those moments of change. Catherine had been alone since then, but it never looked like she was lost or lonely. Rather, she chose this path herself, plunging headlong into the world of cybersecurity, complex algorithms, digital investigations, and virtual chaos, which, oddly enough, she knew how to organize. She knew how systems work, how they are broken, and how to protect those who have no idea how vulnerable they are in the modern world. But despite this, she always found time for Chloe and Daniel. While Michelle had been focusing more on herself lately, Catherine was the aunt who took them on trips, took them go-karting, taught them how to protect their social media from being hacked, and once helped Chloe trick parental controls so she could watch an age-restricted movie. "How long will you stay?" Rick asked, leaning against the wall. Catherine took a sip of wine and shrugged. "Don't kick me out yet. I need a little change of scenery, and your refrigerator is much more interesting than mine. By the way, do you have anything edible besides almond milk and weight loss food? If you're expecting anything other than kale chips, I'm afraid you'll be disappointed," he replied with a grin. Catherine rolled her eyes and turned to Chloe. "Do you understand why I came here? Saving my nephews from their father's culinary torture." "Yeah," Chloe laughed, "but you eat the same protein bars yourself." "This is different," Catherine chuckled. "In my case, this is a conscious choice, and not because someone cleared the refrigerator of normal food." Rick shook his head. What a time she showed up. After 20 minutes of playful verbal sparring between him and Catherine, Michelle entered the house. She was carrying several paper bags from the restaurant and had a joyful smile on her face, but Rick instantly noticed a slight hint of irritation in her gaze. It was an almost imperceptible change in the expression of the eyes, but he knew Michelle well enough to recognize it. Obviously, Catherine's presence was a surprise to her and not a pleasant one. "Sorry for being late," she exclaimed, slamming the door behind her and quickly throwing off her coat. There was slight fatigue in her voice, but at the same time joyful excitement. She hurriedly crossed the threshold, deftly balancing the bag of food in one hand, and walked confidently into the kitchen, the warm aroma of spices and freshly prepared dishes filling the air. "The restaurant delayed the delivery of the order. We had to wait," she continued, throwing a quick glance over her shoulder as if apologizing once again. "But now we will have dinner from our favorite place." Her voice sounded even, but Rick could sense the carefully hidden tension in it. She carefully placed the packages on the wooden table, trying to look unperturbed, but he noticed how her fingers squeezed the handles of the packages a little tighter, how the corners of her lips twitched subtly, betraying her inner anxiety. At the same time, she cast an appraising glance at her sister, quick but tenacious, as if trying to determine how much her presence upsets the existing balance. There was a subtle but palpable tension in the air, as if a silent duel was flaring up between them. Catherine, as always, without losing her insolence, crossed her arms over her chest, tilted her head slightly, and stared at her sister inquisitively. There was not a drop of remorse in her posture. Rather, she enjoyed the effect that her appearance had on Michelle. Rick watched their silent confrontation silently, like an observer on the brink of a thunderstorm. He knew that a month ago there had been a serious conflict between them, but none of the sisters considered it necessary to devote him to the details of the family discord. The secret remained an impenetrable wall between them, and now this wall was only getting stronger. Michelle remembered that day in frightening detail. They stood in her apartment, illuminated by the dim light of the evening sun breaking through the translucent curtains. Catherine, compressing her lips into a thin line, looked at her with a look in which disappointment and hidden anger were visible. She then guessed no, she didn't even guess, but confidently exposed her connection with Tyler. Like a skilled player, she laid out all the cards on the table, leaving her sister no chance of denial. "Do you even understand what you're doing?" Her voice was even, but there was a sharp, almost predatory insistence in it. Michelle then just straightened up, clasped her fingers, and continued to maintain external equanimity. But inside, she was torn apart by a tangle of conflicting emotions: fear, irritation, prickly resentment towards her sister for invading her life, like a judge dispensing justice without the right to appeal. "Rick is too good a husband, and it's a very big mistake to turn into a cheating wife," Catherine continued, tilting her head slightly as if studying her sister's expression. "He definitely won't tolerate this. And in your place, believe me, there are thousands of women who are ready to sell their souls to the devil for such a man." Her words sounded sharp, like the blow of a whip, but Michelle then only smiled coldly, as if it did not hurt her. Her answer was evasive, precise to the smallest detail, but deep down in her heart, she was somehow sure that Catherine would not tell Rick anything. The family dinner went on in the usual rhythm, but behind the ostentatious normalcy, there was a tension that was impossible not to feel. The forks clinked against the plates, the glasses of wine touched the table quietly, and the voices sounded evenly, without much emotional overtones. They exchanged standard phrases, discussed the weather, talked vaguely about plans for the coming days like actors mechanically playing roles they had long ago memorized. But everyone at the table was lost in their own thoughts. Rick ate mechanically, but could barely taste the food. Every time his gaze fell on Michelle, a heaviness rose in his chest. He could not get rid of the oppressive feeling of disgust, that inner pain that was eating away at him from the inside like poison. Catherine, slowly breaking off a piece of bread, carefully watched their interaction. Her eyes, dark and penetrating, captured every detail, fleeting glances, tense pauses, subtle changes in intonation. She did not say anything that could aggravate the situation, but in her presence there was something menacing, like a premonition of an approaching thunderstorm. And Michelle, she tried to act confidently, playing the role of a caring housewife, but her movements were too clear, as if calibrated. She smiled at the right moments, inserted routine phrases into the conversation, but anxiety lurked in the depths of her gaze. She knew that Catherine was not just watching. The illusion of an ideal home was crumbling right before their eyes. The cracks in this carefully created picture became more and more noticeable. Stupid conversations, insincere smiles, empty words, all this was just a thin veil under which emotions boiled, hurting like shards of broken glass. Tyler Grant lay back on the wide bed, exhaling deeply, allowing his body to completely disappear into the soft, rumpled sheets. The heart was still beating a leisurely rhythm, a slight tremor of pleasure spread through the muscles, leaving behind a pleasant fatigue. The room was filled with a thick, tart aroma, her expensive perfume mixed with the smell of hot skin, light perspiration, and whiskey, creating an atmosphere of forbidden, intoxicating pleasure. He ran his hand over his face, then slowly stretched, feeling the muscles stretch pleasantly, reminiscent of the passion he had just experienced. Everything went perfect, as always. He slowly stood up, walked to the bar, and poured himself an amber liquid into a crystal glass. After taking one sip, he sat down in a soft chair, crossed his legs, and lit a cigarette. Through the panoramic window, he could see Los Angeles at night, a city that he had once considered his arena, but now saw in it only as a place where the rich spent money and people like him took it. Once upon a time, everything was different. His life was like a whirlwind big sport, prestigious tournaments, contracts with top brands, the glare of spotlights, and applause from the crowd. He lived fast, to the limit, as if every day was a race in which he could not slow down. Luxurious hotels, private jet flights, parties where toasts were made in his honor, and the sweet feeling of victory that overshadowed everything else. But one day this world collapsed, falling on him with the crunch of a broken fate. He was 30 when he was disqualified for using illegal drugs. The damning headline appeared on the front pages of sports publications and then spread around the world, turning his name into a synonym for shame. He didn't see it as a problem. Everyone used something to stay on top. It was an unspoken rule among professionals. To win, you need to go beyond human capabilities. Only he was unlucky. Fate, merciless and indifferent, crossed out his career with one official statement. Everything he had built over the years collapsed in an instant. But Tyler wasn't one to give up. Having lost one battle, he was not going to leave the battlefield. He knew the taste of luxury too well. He was used to expensive suits, elite alcohol, and five-star hotels. Living on minimum wage? No, it wasn't for him. He found a new way to exist beautifully. The scheme he came up with, although it was not entirely legal, worked without failures and brought in a stable income. He acted carefully, skillfully maneuvering in a gray area where laws were blurred and moral boundaries were easily shifted when money was at stake. But the main thing is that he quickly realized that his appearance, charisma, and sports background could bring profit no worse than tennis tournaments. There were rich clients, bored wives of influential men, for whom life turned into a series of receptions, breakfasts in expensive restaurants, and indifferent glances from their husbands. These women were looking for emotion, drive, the illusion of passion, and Tyler knew how to give them what they wanted. At first, it was just tennis lessons, light flirting bordering on innocence. But he soon realized that women were willing to pay for more than just sports. Expensive gifts, trips to exotic countries, luxury watches, cash in envelopes, all this became his new reality. He became something like a luxurious toy, a beautiful entertainment, a man for whose attention they were ready to fight. And that suited him. After all, in this world where everything is bought and sold, he remained afloat, receiving his price for every smile, every meeting, every whispered promise. Michelle was one of them, but at the same time different. She didn't just want sex, she enjoyed living on the edge, balancing between adrenaline and fear of exposure. In her gaze, one could read the desire to prove to herself that she was still the same woman for whom men would lose their heads. He saw how her hands trembled not from passion, but from a sense of danger. It turned her on. He chuckled, flicking the ashes into the ashtray. She's not the first, and she won't be the last. But one thing really irritated him, her husband. Rick Bennett. Too perfect. Rich, successful, respected. A man who was envied. Tyler hated those. He saw them as a reminder that he could once be in their place. Now he could only take from them what they considered theirs. And this brought him special pleasure. Michelle said that their marriage was strong, that he was like family to her. But why then did she come to him? Tyler knew that people like her never leave their husbands. They just need to dilute the routine, add flavor to their boring life. But if everything was clear with her, then with Rick Bennett, everything was different. He had a burning desire to mock him, to crush him, but Tyler could not do it. Bennett was too great a figure, too unattainable a player. Therefore, all that remained was to take pleasure in humiliating him verbally in those moments when his wife squirmed under him, greedily catching every word. He saw how these phrases kindled in her not the purebred wife, but the most classic woman of easy virtue. It flattered him, it turned him on. This was his petty but sweet revenge. His phone vibrated. Message from Michelle. You were incredible. I already miss you. The problem is that Catherine came to visit. The level of caution is maximum. She knows about us. We'll try not to provoke. Tyler grinned and took another sip of his whiskey. Everything was going exactly the way he wanted. The phone beeped again, notification from the bank plus $2,000, sender Michelle Bennett. He remembered that he needed to check the state of his finances. So far his machinations were going according to plan. He thought that he needed to set aside time for this and consult with his financial manager. The weekend with Catherine unexpectedly softened the atmosphere in the house. Her caustic humor, relaxedness, and endless energy seemed to diffuse the tension hanging in the air. But now she was gone, and the silence again began to fill the mansion with an unbearable heaviness. The air became thicker, the walls seemed to press, reminding Riku of the inevitability of the coming day. After she left, Rick decided to take Chloe for a walk. He felt that they needed to talk somewhere else, away from this atmosphere of lies and tension. They went to the park, the same one where he took her as a child. Then he bought her ice cream, laughed at her childhood stories, and answered endless questions. Now everything was different. Now he knew that this conversation would change a lot. Rick bought 2 cones and gave one to his daughter. They walked slowly along the green alleys, lost in their thoughts. It seemed as if the whole world had narrowed down to this path, to the light crunch of sand underfoot and melting ice cream in your hands. Does anyone else know? He finally asked, without looking at Chloe. No, just you, she answered quietly, licking the ice cream. But Dad, the video is on YouTube. It popped up in my recommendations feed, and it seems that it's not just me. It received thousands of views, but thank God the picture is not very clear. No face visible. I only recognized my mother by the ring you gave her for her anniversary. Daniel doesn't know anything, he clarified. No, and to be honest, I think it's better not to talk for now. He's going through an important period in his work right now. I'm afraid this will unsettle him. I think it's worth telling him about this a little later. Rick looked at his daughter carefully. She reasoned calmly, reasonably, without unnecessary emotions. He could hardly suppress his pride in her, even at such a moment. She is grown up. Was she strong because of him? or because of the betrayal that I saw with my own eyes? I agree, he nodded curtly. We'll remain silent for now. Chloe sighed and looked up at him. Something like doubt flashed in her eyes. You're not just going to leave it, are you? Rick chuckled. A steely glint flashed in his eyes. He wondered if he should tell her more, but then decided that enough was enough. Tomorrow is your mother's day of judgment. Chloe nodded slowly. She knew that her father had already decided everything. Now all that was left was to wait. She didn't feel sorry for her mother because she made her choice herself. Chloe also thought about the fact that Michelle was having another charity evening tomorrow, and she even began to wonder what kind of execution her father was planning. The evening light fell softly on their faces, but instead of warmth it brought with it a feeling of cold foreboding. Tomorrow their lives will change forever. The evening was filled with brilliance and luxury. One of the most prestigious sports charities in Los Angeles was hosting a gala to raise funds to support young athletes who do not have the financial means to develop professionally. It was an annual event that brought together the most influential people in the city: businessmen, actors, musicians, and, of course, representatives of the sports world. This year, the special guest of the evening was the band Imagine Dragons, who were scheduled to perform a live set towards the end of the event. The hall at the luxurious Beverly Wilshire Hotel was aglow with camera flashes. Huge chandeliers shimmered with soft light reflected in glasses of champagne. Waiters scurried between guests, serving expensive snacks. The aroma of elite perfume was in the air, mixed with subtle notes of aged alcohol. Michelle sparkled in her outfit. She chose a deep emerald-colored dress that perfectly emphasized her toned figure. Her hair was styled in elegant waves, and her jewels, chosen with impeccable taste, gave her even more charm. She was in her element. She smiled, easily communicated with guests, caught the admiring glances of men and the envious glances of women. Her confidence was impeccable, but behind that mask there was something else. Something that only one person in this room felt. Rick stood nearby, watching his wife with icy calm. He knew that this evening would be her last when she felt like the master of her life. Andrew, standing nearby, silently sipped his whiskey, occasionally exchanging a few words with influential guests. He understood perfectly well what was happening, but, as always, maintained external equanimity. Chloe, dressed in an elegant black dress, stayed close to her father, watching her mother with a slight grin. Unlike her, Chloe saw right through this performance. Tyler was among the guests. He looked a little nervous, but there was a hint of smugness in his gaze. He enjoyed this world, felt like part of the elite, although he knew very well that he was here only because Michelle invited him. In the center of the hall, there was a huge screen on which moments from the live broadcast of the evening were projected. The camera moved between the guests, showing close-ups of influential people, their casual conversations, easy smiles, toasts, and laughter. Everything looked perfect until Rick received a text message. Attention to the screen. Everything is ready, Chief. He looked up. The camera slowly changed angles, and a corridor appeared on the screen near the closed lounge area behind the bar, a place where only a select few entered, where partial shade reigned and muffled music sounded. Michelle and Tyler stood among the marble columns, partially hidden behind tall living plants. Their faces were illuminated by the soft light of the chandeliers, but the atmosphere between them was far from small talk. He held her by the waist, his fingers lightly sliding along the fabric of her dress. She laughed, leaning towards him, and then, unable to resist, she reached out with her lips to his neck. Tyler didn't hesitate. He pulled her closer to him. Their kiss was filled with passion, movement, electricity. For some in the audience, it looked romantic. For others, it looked simply piquant. But those who knew the Bennett family realized the full essence of what was happening in the blink of an eye. This wasn't just flirting. It was an act of adultery exposed for all to see. Rick thought through everything down to the smallest detail. He knew that this moment would come. He was 100% sure that the lovers would try to steal time for themselves at least for a couple of minutes, and he was preparing for this as the most important project in his life. He even paid for a special musical number from musicians that was supposed to be the perfect backdrop for her humiliation. When Michelle and Tyler's kiss was interrupted by a man holding an envelope, there was an awkward pause in the room, and then there were surprised whispers. The guests, dressed in expensive suits and evening dresses, turned around, not understanding what was happening. The stranger clearly did not belong to this secular society. His clothes were too simple, as if he had just stepped off the street. His movements were sharp, tense, and his facial expression was harsh, even contemptuous. He didn't hesitate. With a quick, precise gesture, Mitchell handed the envelope, as if it had been planned in advance. "Michelle Bennett, you have been notified." His voice sounded clear, loud, with a tinge of gloomy satisfaction, as if he had just put the finishing touches on someone's beautifully played-out lie. The hall froze. Someone gasped, someone exhaled depressedly, and someone, on the contrary, leaned forward with interest, feeling that they had witnessed something truly scandalous. And it was at that moment that the music started playing. Familiar chords cut through the air, echoing from the luxurious walls. Loudly, insistently, with increasing tension, the words of the song rang out. "My eyes are open, my eyes are open. Oh, I can't believe what I see. My eyes are open, my eyes are open. Oh, I can't believe what I see." The voices of the guests fell silent. Now there is only rhythm, electrified air, and an envelope in Michelle's hands. She didn't move, didn't take it right away. She just pressed her lips together, and something like fear was reflected on her face. The guests' eyes were glued to the scene of the revelation. Michelle opened the envelope in confusion and saw the divorce papers. Her hands shook, her eyes darted around the crowd, looking for Rick. He didn't look at her anymore. He simply turned around and, taking Chloe by the hand, headed towards the exit. Michelle felt the ground disappear from under her feet. She realized that she had just lost everything. Rick is not the kind of person who forgives betrayal. She and Tyler quickly left the event and went to his apartment. She was shaking. She drank in an attempt to drown out her thoughts, but there was only emptiness inside. What now? What's next? The morning light mercilessly made its way through the curtains, filling the room with a grayish glow. My head was pounding. The whiskey burned. The bitterness in my mouth and the dryness in my throat reminded me of the night before, of too much alcohol, which should have numbed the pain but only made it worse. Michelle slowly sat up in bed, having difficulty concentrating on the reality around her. The room felt alien, as if she had woken up in a life that was no longer hers. Her gaze fell on the table next to the bed. There, among empty glasses, a crumpled napkin with a mark of lipstick and bitter tears, lay a stack of papers. The same ones. She swallowed, trying to get rid of the lump in her throat, and, with trembling fingers, unfolded the first sheet. Cold legal language stuck in my eyes. Divorce. Her life in this marriage came down to a few points, stated in dry, official language. She reread the lines over and over again. She remembered that she had once signed a marriage contract, but still hoped to see something that would change the essence of the document. But no, Rick left her with exactly what she came into this marriage with. No real estate, no bills, no promotions, only her personal belongings, a couple of jewelry, and a car that he bought her 5 years ago. Everything that seemed an integral part of her life turned out to be just gifts that could be taken back. Michelle bit her lip. Until recently, she felt like a queen. She lived in a house where everything belonged to her. Expensive clothes, restaurants, exclusive trips, dinners with influential people who looked at her with admiration. Now all this disappeared in an instant. She clutched the papers in her hands, feeling panic growing inside her. Everything she thought was stability turned out to be a soap bubble. How many years did she spend in this marriage, confident that their union was unbreakable? How many years did she enjoy the status of Mrs. Bennett, without thinking that this status rested only on the trust of her husband, and how stupid it was to betray this trust? Tyler stirred quietly next to him, stretching. He did not yet realize that now it was not a socialite lying next to him, but a woman who had lost everything. He smiled, lazily stroking her shoulder. "Good morning," his voice was hoarse. "How are you?" Michelle didn't respond immediately. She just looked at the documents, trying to figure out what to do now. Where is her house? Where is her life? Where is her future? Damn, looks like we had too much yesterday, Tyler muttered, rolling over onto his back. My head is just pounding. She slowly turned her gaze to him. Just yesterday, he seemed to her like passion, excitement, a way out of routine. Now he was just a man in a cheap room in a rented apartment, as empty as her entire essence. Tyler Grant sat with an ice pack on his split lip. But the worst thing was the realization that his world was collapsing. Not work, not finances, all this could be restored. He had already done this before. It was his ego that suffered the most. Yesterday, he was thrown out of a luxury hotel, humiliated and beaten. Jack, a former client, the jealous husband of one of his wealthy clients, did not come for clarification. He came for revenge. Tyler tried to defend himself, but missed the blow before he could say a word. Now he sat, feeling the ice burn his skin, and yesterday's events echoed in his head. The phone vibrated in his hand, but he knew that nothing good would happen there. He pressed the lock button. The screen flashed with a multitude of notifications. Thousands of messages, hundreds of comments, dozens of missed calls. My glance caught several news headlines. Sex scandal at an elite tennis club. A famous coach destroyed the family of a wealthy couple. From court star to exile, the scandal that rocked Los Angeles. My heart beat faster. Tyler scrolled through the comments, a stream of insults, ridicule, malicious jokes. His name became a meme, his reputation a muddy puddle that everyone happily dug into. Damn, he whispered, squeezing the phone in his hand. In a panic, he quickly dialed the number of Dan Martin, the club director. Several long beeps, and finally a cold voice was heard. What do you want, Tyler? Dude, I can explain. It's late, Dan interrupted. We terminated your contract. Good luck in another area. Horns. The conversation is over. Tyler freezes and then throws the phone forcefully against the wall. A dull thud, a crunch of glass, the screen cracks, but that doesn't matter anymore. He lost. His second attempt, everything he had built over the years collapsed overnight, and he knew who was behind it. In his own office, Tyler paced around the room, furiously stuffing things into his gym bag. Anger tore him from the inside. His office was no longer his, nor was his career, nor his life. Everything was destroyed, turning into dust underfoot. Loud knock on the door. He turned around sharply. Matt, his financial advisor, walked in. The face is tense, the lips are tightly compressed. There is anxiety in the eyes. Bad news. Tyler, we have a problem, he said dully. What the hell is the problem? Grant exploded. All your accounts are blocked. Tyler froze. What? His voice was hoarse from surprise. You have huge taxes. Your latest transfers look like money laundering. Tyler slowly sank into his chair, his hands tugging at his hair. It was impossible. He always knew how to be careful. He's not a fool. Someone purposefully set a trap, and he fell completely into it. Damn, Rick is putting me in this shit on purpose. He jerked the phone away, dialing Michelle's number. In a small rented apartment, Michelle walked around the room. Yesterday, she left Tyler and rented the first apartment she came across. She needed to sort herself out. She was trying to figure out what to do next, haphazardly sipping wine from a glass. Her phone lay on the table, the screen flickering. 50+ missed messages from Tyler. She knew things were getting out of control, but I had no idea what to do. The doorbell rang, loud, persistent. He tore open the silence of the apartment, making her heart sink. Michelle winced. She froze for a second, squeezing the edge of her silk robe in her fingers. Who is it at this hour? An uneasy feeling slowly grew in my chest. She approached carefully, feeling how every step echoed dully in the silence. Her hand trembled on the handle, and she slowly opened the door. Tyler stood in the doorway. His appearance shocked her. Tousled hair, rumpled, torn clothes in places, a trace of dried blood in the corner of his mouth and a swollen lip. His breathing was ragged, and his eyes were burning anger, panic, fatigue, fear mixed together, creating the image of a man driven into a corner. "What are you doing here?" She exhaled, her voice trembling. "I'm being destroyed, damn it," he barked, gritting his teeth. The veins bulged in his arms, his fists tense. He stepped inside, breathing heavily, and she involuntarily stepped back. Something about his condition frightened her. Tyler was furious, not just angry, but desperate, ready to do anything. I, I don't know what's going on," she whispered, feeling panic rising in her throat. But before he could respond, a new sound was heard. A loud, authoritative knock on the door. It tore through the air, causing them both to flinch. Tyler froze, his gaze darting to the door, and his face turned chalk pale for a second. Michelle thought about who it could be because only Tyler knew the address of her new place of residence. "Tyler Grant," came a hard, impassive voice from the other side. "You have been arrested on suspicion of fraud and money laundering. Open the door immediately." Tyler clenched his fists so hard his knuckles turned white. His chest rose and fell sharply. All. He lost. This was the point of no return. Michelle stood in a stupor, unable to utter a word. Rick Bennett looked out the window of his spacious office, thoughtfully tapping his fingers on the smooth wooden surface of his desk. Behind the panoramic windows lies the city at night, bright lights of advertising signs, flickering windows of high-rise buildings, endless streams of cars. But he didn't see it. His thoughts were focused on only one thing. Everything was going according to plan. Every step, every little detail, he thought through everything down to the smallest detail. The destruction of Michelle and Tyler was not an outburst of emotion. It was not mindless revenge caused by the pain of betrayal. No, this was the principle. Betrayal had a price, and he made sure that the price was as high as possible. He did it calmly, methodically, like a chess player calculating games dozens of moves ahead. He didn't just destroy their relationship, he deprived them of their future. Tyler was defeated. His life was now nothing but ruins, and Michelle. She found herself backed into a corner, deprived of support, reputation, and even hope of redemption. And most importantly, she didn't even try to contact the children. Not a single attempt. Not a call, not a message, not even a weak request to see each other. Michelle knew it was useless. Chloe and Daniel always stood by their father. They loved him, respected him, saw in him the strength and stability that their mother, immersed in her own desires, had so easily betrayed. And now there was no exception. They turned away from her just as she had once turned away from their family. Rick chuckled. He slowly raised his glass of whiskey, watching the amber liquid roll in the light of the table lamp. Justice has been served. Chloe went to visit her brother. Rick watched her car disappear through the gate, but his thoughts were far away. He knew this conversation with Daniel was inevitable. The son had the right to know the truth, the whole truth. Therefore, when he dialed his number, something sank inside. The phone rang, one ring, two. Then Daniel answered. Rick spoke calmly, measuredly, setting out the essence without unnecessary details, but with complete frankness. He explained everything: the betrayal, the consequences, how Michelle herself ruined her life. There was silence on the line. No indignation, no surprise, not even a long thought. Daniel listened in silence, as if passing every word through himself, digesting what was said. And then, after a short pause, he calmly and confidently said, "Father, you did what you had to do. I'm proud of you." Rick gripped the phone tighter, his fingers turning white with tension. Those words meant more to him than he would admit. Later that day, Andrew's office. Rick opened the heavy door and entered a spacious office filled with the subtle aroma of expensive alcohol and cigars. Andrew was already waiting for him, lounging in his leather chair, a glass of whiskey in his hand. A small smirk crossed his lips when he saw Rick. "She signed," the lawyer said without further preamble, looking up at him with a calm, almost satisfied look. Rick silently walked to the chair opposite and slowly sank into it. He wasn't surprised, but still wanted to hear the details. Without resistance. His voice was even, but deep down there was a tense note. Andrew chuckled as he took a small sip. Fortunately for her, she was smart enough not to challenge your marriage contract. She had no chance. The only thing she could do was stall for time and try to get consultations with a family psychologist, he drawled, twirling the glass in his fingers, watching the amber liquid roll over the glass. She probably realized that she had no chance. Now she is officially a nobody. The last words were spoken with cold finality. They hung in the air like a seal on a sentence. Rick didn't answer right away. It's over. She lost. But was this satisfaction? Or did the strange emptiness that crept inside again mean something else? He reached over to the bottle on the table, poured himself a glass of whiskey, and raised his glass. Then let's finish the job, he said calmly. The glasses clinked quietly. It was truly over, and there was no turning back anymore. Rick nodded, but a new question lit up in his eyes. He thoughtfully ran his hand over his chin, as if weighing his thoughts, then spoke slowly, clearly, as if he was saying it more for himself than for his interlocutor. There is one point that I still cannot understand. Andrew looked at him carefully over his glass of whiskey. Who sent me an anonymous message about Tyler's dirty tricks? Rick paused. His voice became quieter, but firmer. Who is this assistant? The lawyer narrowed his eyes slightly, as if contemplating the answer, and then reached for the laptop, deftly opening the folder with correspondence. I looked through all the mail, but the source is encrypted, he said, quickly running his eyes over the lines of data. The laptop screen illuminated his face with a cold light, giving him an almost predatory expression. However, Rick frowned. A familiar feeling of uneasiness welled up in my chest. Something didn't add up. He leaned closer, watching Andrew scroll through his list of messages until his eye caught one of the old letters. Everything inside suddenly became tense. Something about him seemed wrong. He slowly looked down, watching the flashing text until his eyes came across a tiny symbol in the corner of the screen. He froze. The symbol was barely visible, but he recognized it. A simple mark at first glance, but it gave him an unpleasant feeling, as if something long forgotten had burst to the surface of his consciousness. This symbol. His voice became quiet, almost a whisper. He felt a chill run down his spine. Something familiar. Andrew looked over at him, clearly sensing the change in mood. Have you seen him somewhere before? I don't know, he clearly reminds me of something. I just can't understand what. The next morning, Rick woke up to the sound of a new notification. He reached for his phone and opened the anonymous message. You were great, Rick. The way you handled it was top-notch. His gaze slowly moved to the corner of the screen. There's that symbol again. Black cat. Catherine. Rick stood in front of the door, taking a deep breath of the cold late evening air. The frosty air burned his lungs, but he didn't even notice it, focused on what was about to happen. His heart beat unevenly, tension grew in his chest, but he did not allow himself to retreat. The light outside the window said that she was at home, and her car, parked in its usual place, only confirmed this. She's here, and this conversation must take place. He couldn't wait any longer. I didn't want to. In one motion, he pressed the bell, not even allowing himself to change his mind. The door opened almost instantly, as if she was standing on the other side, waiting for his arrival. Or is it just a coincidence? Catherine stood in the doorway, dressed in a soft, dark-colored knitted sweater and simple jeans. Her image seemed so homely, cozy, as if she had just enjoyed the peace in her refuge. Her hair is a little disheveled, as if she ran her fingers through the strands, distracted by thoughts. Surprise flashed in his eyes, but not shock. She always knew how to control herself, even in moments of surprise. This gift made her special, the ability to instantly adapt to any situation. Rick, her voice was calm, but he detected a slight wariness in her intonation. Catherine had always had amazing insight, and now she was clearly studying him, trying to understand what he had come with. Her dark eyes carefully scanned him, as if assessing not only his appearance, but also his internal state. Are you okay? He didn't answer immediately. A whole storm of emotions raged inside him, but he held on. He just looked at her, his gaze lingering on her lips, too soft, too calm for the situation in which they found themselves. Then he slowly raised his eyes back to hers. Dark, insightful, the same as always. "Can I come in?" Catherine didn't think twice. She simply nodded, taking a smooth step back and clearing the passage. No words, no questions. Her silence seemed more expressive than any remarks. Rick stepped inside and was immediately enveloped by the familiar smell of her home. Light, warm, with notes of coffee and vanilla. He remembered this scent. He was always elusive to her, unlike others. Inside, everything remained the same as he remembered. A laconic interior, the absence of unnecessary details, minimalism, thought out to the smallest detail. White walls, dark furniture, neatly stacked books on a shelf. But even among this severity, there were things that revealed her true essence. For example, a small figurine of a black cat that stood next to the books. This tiny symbol now haunted him. For some reason, right now he saw in it something more than just a souvenir. Something personal, something meaningful. Rick sat down on the sofa, resting his elbows on his knees, and looked at her intently. "You're playing a game, Cat." Catherine froze for a second, almost imperceptibly, but he still caught it. She could deceive anyone, but not him. However, after a moment, she smiled lightly, crossing her arms over her chest, as if she had absolutely nothing to hide. "What game?" Her voice sounded with a hint of curiosity, but without a hint of excitement. He didn't respond with words. He simply took the phone out of his pocket, unlocked the screen, and handed it to her. The display glowed in the twilight, reflecting undeniable evidence. "Don't pretend you don't know." Catherine picked up the phone and took a quick glance at the screen. Her eyes widened for a split second, but that was enough to understand. She understood everything. This did not escape him. And yet, the barely noticeable shock was immediately replaced by icy indifference. She shrugged and casually threw the phone on the table, taking a sip of wine from the glass that stood nearby. Her movements were calm, polished, as if she had rehearsed this moment in advance. "What, do you think it's me?" Her voice remained even, almost lazy. Rick was silent. He wasn't about to state the obvious. She already knew that he had no doubts. Catherine smiled at the corners of her lips, leaning on the armrest of her chair. "Let's say it's me." She tilted her head slightly to the side, as if studying his reaction. "What's next?" He grinned. Her manner of communication, her restraint. She just admitted, although she could continue to deny. It was her style to take the game to the next level, instead of making excuses. "Then I have one question." Rick leaned forward, his voice becoming quieter, but firmer. "For what?" Catherine put the glass on the table and froze for a moment. Something distant and personal flashed in her eyes. It was like a memory that she didn't want to let out, but that could no longer remain hidden. Then, almost in a whisper, she answered, "Because you deserve it." Rick didn't take his eyes off her face. He saw shadows of emotion run across her features as tension slid along the line of her shoulders. This was not an easy game. It was something more. "I've watched all my life how you love her, how you give her all of yourself. And she didn't appreciate you." She paused, holding her breath before continuing. Her voice was almost shaking, but she controlled herself. "I couldn't allow a man like you to be so cruelly deceived." Her words slowly settled in him, like ashes after a burnt letter. He suddenly realized that she did it for his sake, and there was more truth in this confession than in the entire family life with Michelle. Catherine looked away and chuckled quietly, as if to herself. She remembered how one day, while listening to her sister, she realized that something was wrong. Everything changed that evening when she accidentally overheard her sister talking. Some carelessly thrown words, an intonation that could be mistaken for ordinary excitement, but Catherine sensed a catch. Anxiety welled up inside her, and as soon as Michelle left, she began to dig deeper. At first, these were innocent checks, searching for information about her personal life, account statements, viewing the history of transfers. Then mail hacking. When Catherine finally got to the necessary data, there was no doubt. Michelle was cheating on Rick. She gave herself time. I thought that Rick would sooner or later notice the obvious. But, as often happens, he was blinded by his love, so devoted to the woman that he did not see what was right before his eyes. Catherine couldn't stand it. She knew that if she simply told him the truth, he might not believe or, worse, forgive Michelle. We had to act smarter. She hired a man who obtained the first direct evidence for her that same video, material that could not be disputed. But just hand it over to Rick? No. Catherine came up with a plan. Using her knowledge, she made sure the video ended up with the right person, Chloe. The girl was smart, quick-witted, and it was not for nothing that Catherine paid so much attention to her niece. She knew what she would do, and Chloe really did everything exactly as Catherine expected. And then the events formed into an ideal picture. The only thing she didn't foresee was that Rick would guess who was behind this revelation. Rick leaned back, closing his eyes. A tense silence filled the space between them. "How long did you?" "No." His voice sounded hoarse. Catherine walked to the window, crossing her arms over her chest. "For months. I checked her phone, followed her translations. I was just waiting for you to open your eyes." Rick stood up slowly, his movements almost mechanical. She continued to look out the window at the lights of the night city, when suddenly she said, "And when you found out, it was the best day of my life." He was right behind her, close, so much so that I felt the warmth of her body. Catherine turned to him, meeting his gaze. There was a challenge in her eyes, but there was something else hidden underneath. "What now, Rick?" She bowed her head, smiling slowly. "Am I your main suspect?" He didn't answer. He simply raised his hand, gently running his fingers over her cheek. "No, now you are. Completely different." She parted her lips slightly, but no words came. Rick couldn't hold back any longer. He leaned towards her and kissed her. Deep, greedy, like a man who has just broken his old life and started a new one. Catherine kissed back without hesitation. Her fingers ran through his hair, pulling him closer, and his arms tightened around her waist. She found herself pressed against the wall, but did not try to escape. Her breath mixed with his, her lips were burning, and her heart was beating so fast that it seemed like it could break out. Outside the window, hundreds of lights scattered in the darkness, but at that moment the world outside this room ceased to exist. All that mattered was what was happening here and now. Early morning. It's still dark outside, but Los Angeles at night is starting to fade away, giving way to a new day. Dazzling neon lights reflect on the glass, flickering as if thousands of eyes are watching what is happening inside. Rick stretched out on the wide bed, throwing his hands behind his head. The sheets are rumpled. The air is saturated with the warm, subtle aromas of the past night. His breathing is even, but his thoughts are restless chaos is happening in his head. Scenes flash in flashes, like fragments of a film, frozen frames of the experience. Hot glances, touches, kisses, dull moans in the semi-darkness. Everything mixed into a strange, heady cocktail of emotions, leaving in the soul a barely perceptible taste of something irreversible. From the bathroom comes the muffled sound of water, first a soft splash, then a short, ringing silence. The door opens slightly, releasing a thin stream of humid air, saturated with the aromas of shower gel and hot body. Catherine steps out, her silhouette clearly outlined in the soft, muted light pouring from behind her. A thin silk robe, like a second skin, emphasizes the curves of her figure, barely covering the long, seductive lines of her legs. The moisture has not yet completely left her body. Drops of water lazily flow down her neck, linger in the hollow of her collarbones, and then disappear behind the thinnest fabric. She adjusts her belt, casually pulling her robe tighter, but this gesture only makes her even more desirable. Rick lazily turns his head, his gaze, clouded by memories, clinging to her. He grins, and then, in a slightly hoarse morning voice, says, "Here, kitty kitty, time to play." Catherine freezes for a second. Then her lips slowly stretch into a smile, insidious, playful, almost dangerous. "Be careful, Rick." Her voice is rustling, like a snake's whisper. She takes a step towards him, then another. "You don't know what you've gotten yourself into." She sits on the edge of the bed, letting her fingertips trail over his bare chest. A light touch, barely noticeable, but capable of exploding the nerve endings. He catches her wrist and pulls her closer. Their gazes meet challenge versus challenge. Catherine bites her lip, then slips out of his grasp with feline grace. You're funny, Rick, but do you know what you're getting into? She reaches for the switch, and the lights in the room slowly go out, once again plunging them into the darkness of their dirty thoughts. I wonder what Michelle is doing now.